The hiss of the industrial-grade coffee machine in the break room was the soundtrack to Frank's life. Not the gentle burble of a home appliance, mind you, but a full-throated, aggressive roar that sounded like a dragon clearing its throat before a particularly unpleasant nap. It was loud, it was obnoxious, and it was, in Frank's deeply held, meticulously catalogued opinion, a metaphor for the entire damn company. And today, that dragon was about to sing its swan song for him. Frank wasn't a man of grand gestures. His natural habitat was a dimly lit corner of the office, hunched over a keyboard, coaxing elegant solutions out of lines of code that would make lesser engineers weep into their lukewarm energy drinks. He was the kind of quiet brilliance that's often mistaken for invisibility. The kind of guy who could debug a multi-million-dollar system on a Tuesday afternoon while simultaneously planning his meticulously organized grocery list for the week. He knew every subroutine, every byte, every forgotten comment in the legacy code that kept this entire digital empire standing. He was the unseen foundation, the bedrock beneath the polished veneer of innovation and disruptive synergy that Mark and Brian loved to wax poetic about. The discovery had been innocuous at first, a whisper in the system, a slight anomaly in the security logs that most would dismiss as a glitch. But Frank's brain didn't do dismiss, it did investigate, analyze, and document. He'd spent 3 days, fueled by stale office donuts and a growing sense of dread, tracing the tendrils of the vulnerability. It wasn't a minor oversight. It was a gaping maw, a security abyss that, if exploited, could unravel everything. Think of it like finding a hairline fracture in the hull of the Titanic, except this Titanic was made of sensitive customer data, and the icebergs were a global network of hackers who probably wore more fashionable sweaters than Brian. He'd compiled his findings into a report. Not a hastily typed memo, but a comprehensive annotated masterpiece, complete with reproducible steps, potential exploitation scenarios, and a severity rating that screamed code red. Evacuate all pigeons. He'd even included a section on preventative measures, detailing a relatively simple, albeit time-consuming, architectural change that would shore up the system and send those pesky hackers packing. He printed it, bound it with a professional binder clip, the kind that actually holds things together, and walked it over to Mark's office. Mark, the co-founder, a man whose smile was as slick as his perfectly coiffed hair, and whose honesty was as flexible as a contortionist's spine. Mark dealt in pitches, in promises, in the art of the pivot. He was the embodiment of the modern tech bro, a walking, talking embodiment of buzzwords and borrowed confidence. He treated Frank's carefully crafted report like it was a flyer for a lost cat. "Frank, buddy, good to see you," Mark had said, his eyes already scanning an email on his triple monitor setup, his fingers tapping a rapid, nonsensical rhythm on his keyboard. "What's this?" He'd taken the report, flipped through it with the speed of a magician revealing his final card, and then nothing. "Yeah, looks thorough," Mark had mused, placing it on a stack of other reports that probably hadn't been opened since they were printed. "But, security? You know, Brian and I are laser focused on user growth right now. This whole system overhaul thing, it's a pretty heavy lift, Frank. Big impact on the Q3 projections. We're talking millions, maybe tens of millions. We're talking about derailing our entire momentum. It's just not on the roadmap." Frank, a man whose internal monologue was usually a symphony of logical progressions, felt a dull thud in his chest. "Mark, this isn't about momentum. This is about the integrity of our entire platform. If this gets exploited..." Mark waved a dismissive hand, cutting him off. Yeah, if. Look, Frank, we appreciate your diligence, but we've got teams of people focused on security. This is probably just a false positive, a blip. Don't worry about it. Focus on getting those new user onboarding metrics up, okay? That's where the real value island. False positive. Frank's mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic, recoiled at the phrase. It was the corporate equivalent of a doctor telling a patient with a gaping wound to just walk it off. He tried Brian next. Brian, the CEO. A man who believed his own charisma was a tangible asset, capable of negotiating gravity. Brian was all about the vision, the disruption, the moving fast and breaking things mantra, except when those things were his own ego or his carefully constructed narrative of success. Brian's office was a monument to his perceived greatness. Awards he'd probably never earned, inspirational quotes plastered on the walls, and a view that could make a grown man feel like the king of the world, or at least the king of Silicon Valley. Brian listened with a condescending half-smile, occasionally interjecting with a dismissive chuckle. Security risk, Frank? You're worried about security? We've got industry-leading cybersecurity protocols in place. Our firewalls are impenetrable. Our encryption is state-of-the-art. The only security risk we have is someone being too cautious, too bogged down in the weeds. We need people who can see the forest. Frank, not just the individual pine needles. But Brian, Frank tried, his voice remarkably steady despite the internal alarm bells clanging like a fire sale at a gong factory. This isn't just a pine needle. It's a parasitic fungus that's about to eat the entire forest from the roots up. I've demonstrated how it can be exploited. Brian leaned back in his ridiculously oversized leather chair, crossing his arms. Frank, your diligence is noted. But frankly, you're being a bit paranoid. This constant hand-wringing, this obsession with worst-case scenarios, it's not productive. It's a drain on morale. It's a drain on resources. We're on the cusp of a major funding round, and the last thing we need is our lead engineer running around like Chicken Little screaming about the sky falling. He steepled his fingers. We need people who are optimistic, who are forward-thinking, not security risks. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Security risk. It was a label they were already trying to pin on him, a convenient excuse to ignore the inconvenient truth he brought them. So, you're saying you don't want me to fix this? Frank asked, his voice barely a whisper. Brian gave a little head shake, his expensive watch glinting under the office lights. We're saying we don't need you to fix something that isn't broken, Frank. We're saying we need you to focus on the bigger picture. And, frankly, your continued fixation on this imaginary threat is becoming a liability. The implications were crystal clear. They weren't going to listen. They were too invested in their narrative, too afraid of the disruption his findings would cause, too blinded by their own ambition and arrogance to see the precipice they were standing on. And they were going to make him the scapegoat. And that, as it turned out, was their first and ultimately their fatal mistake. Because Frank wasn't just a quiet engineer, he was a brilliant one. And he had a secret, a passion that was as meticulously crafted and deeply ingrained as his code. A passion that, unbeknownst to Mark and Brian, was about to become their undoing. The next day, Frank walked into HR's sterile, beige-walled office, his report still clutched in his hand. He was met by a woman named Brenda, whose smile was as forced as a politician's apology, and whose demeanor suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, preferably on the beach with a margarita. Frank, hi, Brenda said, consulting a tablet. We're here to discuss performance alignment. Frank didn't flinch. He'd anticipated this. He'd seen it happen before. The polite, bureaucratic termination of brilliant, inconvenient people. I understand, Frank said, his voice calm and level. He placed the binder on Brenda's desk. This is my complete report on a critical security vulnerability, along with all supporting documentation, including my communication attempts with Mark and Brian. I trust this will be included in my exit package. Brenda's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something akin to unease crossing her face, but it was quickly masked. We'll see what can be processed, Frank. They handed him his final paycheck, a generic severance agreement filled with more legalese than the medieval decree, and a badge that, just yesterday, had granted him access to the digital heart of the company. Today, it was a useless piece of plastic. You are being let go due to a significant divergence in strategic vision and an inability to align with company-wide objectives, Brenda recited, her eyes darting back to her tablet. Essentially, Frank, you were deemed a security risk. Frank stood up, a strange sense of calm washing over him. He looked at Brenda, at the beige walls, at the flickering fluorescent lights that hummed a low, mournful tune. He didn't feel anger. He felt a quiet, profound sense of inevitability. A security risk, Frank repeated, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Yes, I suppose I am, just not in the way you think. He walked out of the office, not with his head bowed, but with his back straight. The outside world, with its honking taxis and indifferent pedestrians, seemed both vibrant and strangely distant. He hadn't won the battle inside the company walls, not by a long shot. But he had something they'd profoundly underestimated, his skills, his dedication, and the secret passion that was about to ignite. He was out, but he wasn't silenced. He was just preparing. And the executives who had so casually dismissed him were about to learn that a quiet engineer, when pushed, could be the most dangerous vulnerability of all. The real work, the real counterplay, was just beginning. He reached into his pocket and felt the cool, familiar shape of his personal laptop. The dragon in the break room might be silent for now, but Frank was about to unleash a storm. Frank's personal laptop hummed a quiet, confident tune as he cradled it like a newborn. The outside world, with its indifferent pace and cacophony of the mundane, felt distant, a muted backdrop to the digital storm he was about to unleash. The sterile, beige walls of HR, the hollow platitudes of Mark and Brian, the dismissive wave of a hand, they were all mere footnotes now, leading to this pivotal chapter. His dismissal, framed as a security risk, had merely been the ignition. Now, the carefully constructed plan was about to ignite. The first step was meticulous. Frank wasn't prone to dramatic displays. His genius lay in precision, in the art of the calculated move. He opened a secure folder, a digital fortress he'd built over years, a place where his true work, the kind that wouldn't be dismissed as paranoid or not on the roadmap, resided. Inside, meticulously organized, were the digital breadcrumbs of his employer's negligence. Emails exchanged with Mark, highlighting his repeated warnings about the vulnerability, each one meticulously timestamped. Brian's dismissive replies, brimming with corporate jargon and the willful ignorance of the escalating threat. And then, the core of it all. His original report, the one they'd barely glanced at, now annotated with even more damning evidence of exploitation potential, complete with simulated attack vectors and the projected impact analysis that made the company's quarterly projections look like pocket change. He'd even preserved the digital echoes of their interactions, screenshots of internal chat logs where Mark had casually mentioned deferring the security audit to meet a launch deadline. A snippet of a video conference with Brian where the CEO, looking directly at the camera, had declared their current security measures impenetrable, period. Each piece of evidence was a tiny, razor-sharp shard waiting to be deployed. This wasn't just documentation. It was an indictment. He cross-referenced every piece of data with public records of similar breaches, highlighting the company's specific vulnerabilities and the predictable financial and reputational damage. He even included details of the cybersecurity firm he'd subtly recommended in his original report, a firm known for its integrity and no-nonsense approach. He worked through the night, his fingers flying across the keyboard, fueled by a quiet, simmering resolve. It wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense, but about restoring balance, about demonstrating the catastrophic cost of their arrogance. He formatted everything into a single, comprehensive package, a digital manifesto that left no room for doubt, no corner for deniability. He chose his distribution channels with the same precision. No flashy leaks to sensationalist news outlets. Instead, he opted for direct, anonymous submissions to leading cybersecurity forums, to industry watchdogs, and, most importantly, to the very firm he'd recommended. He knew they had a reputation for meticulous verification, for ethical disclosure. They wouldn't simply dismiss this. Meanwhile, within the gleaming glass and steel edifice of the company, a subtle tremor began to ripple through the otherwise placid surface of their operations. It started small. A major client, a cornerstone of their revenue stream, sent a terse email inquiring about an unusual spike in their data access logs. The IT department, accustomed to Frank's quiet competence in handling such matters, found themselves fumbling. Without Frank's intimate knowledge of the system's intricate architecture, their attempts to trace the anomaly were like trying to navigate a labyrinth blindfolded. They hit dead ends, ran diagnostics that yielded nonsensical results, and the pressure began to mount. Then, the Q3 earnings call loomed. The executives, still basking in the glow of their own perceived brilliance, were confident, but a whisper began to circulate through the less visible ranks. Rumors of a data breach, dismissed by management as unsubstantiated rumors. A critical integration with a new partner, a deal that represented a significant chunk of their projected growth, stalled indefinitely due to unforeseen technical complexities. The project lead, a bright but overwhelmed junior engineer, found herself wrestling with a system she barely understood, desperately trying to reverse engineer solutions Frank had implemented years ago, solutions no one else had bothered to document. Frank, observing from his digital vantage point, saw the ripples grow into waves. He saw the panicked internal messages, the escalating support tickets that went unanswered. He received a cryptic text from Sarah, a junior developer he mentored. "Frank, are you okay? Things are going crazy here. Some big client is threatening to pull out. And they can't even access the new feature. HR said you were difficult to work with. Did you know about this?" Difficult. Yes, he had been difficult. Difficult to ignore. Difficult to dismiss. The first domino, the one that truly signaled the shift, fell not with a bang, but with a precisely calibrated email. Sent from an anonymous, untraceable address, it landed in the inbox of the lead investigative journalist at a respected cybersecurity publication. The subject line was stark. Company X, a catastrophic security lapse, deliberately ignored. Attached was a meticulously curated package of Frank's findings, stripped of any personal identifiers, but containing irrefutable evidence of the vulnerability, the company's knowledge of it, and the consequences of their inaction. It was a carefully crafted timed release detonation. Simultaneously, a similar, slightly more detailed package landed in the inbox of the CEO of the cybersecurity firm Frank had recommended. This one included a personal, albeit anonymous, note. This vulnerability presents a significant risk. Your firm's reputation for integrity suggests you are the only ones who can bring this to light responsibly. The company has been notified and dismissed the threat. This is your opportunity to uphold ethical standards and protect their users. The response was swift, though not yet visible to the company. The cybersecurity firm, alerted to the potential breach and the company's dismissal of the threat, launched an independent, discreet investigation. Frank, from his quiet apartment, tracked the initial traffic patterns as their digital agents began probing the network. He saw the initial probes, the gentle nudges, then the more forceful attempts as they confirmed the existence and severity of the vulnerability. He watched a silent conductor orchestrating a symphony of corporate downfall as the firm's ethical disclosure protocols kicked into gear. Their process was rigorous. They would attempt to contact the company's official security channels, verify their findings, and provide a narrow window for remediation before public disclosure. Frank knew the company's current security team, hobbled by budget cuts and a lack of expertise, wouldn't be able to bridge that window. They were too busy dealing with the immediate fallout of the client complaints and the stalled integration. Then came the subtle, yet devastating, legal maneuver. Frank, using a proxy service, filed a formal inquiry with the relevant regulatory body. The inquiry was innocuous on its face, a request for clarification regarding data security compliance protocols, specifically in relation to industry-standard auditing procedures for companies handling sensitive customer information. But it was cleverly worded, referencing the very nature of the vulnerability he had identified and implicitly highlighting the company's failure to conduct adequate audits. He didn't accuse them directly, he simply asked for clarification on best practices, knowing that a regulatory body, when presented with a potential systemic risk, would initiate its own inquiries. He watched as the regulatory body's automated systems flagged the inquiry, routing it for review. He saw the initial email notification go out, not to the company's general security address, but to the executive leadership, including Brian and Mark. It was a formal, bureaucratic acknowledgement that their carefully constructed denial was about to be challenged, not by a disgruntled employee, but by the very structures designed to ensure corporate accountability. The panic within the company, previously a low hum, began to escalate. Internal communications became fragmented, laced with hushed conversations and frantic emails. The marketing department, blindsided by the negative press that was starting to trickle out from the cybersecurity publication's initial reporting, vague but damning, scrambled to spin the narrative. The sales team, facing increasingly hostile questions from clients, started pushing back, demanding answers management couldn't provide. Frank received another text, this time from Sarah, more frantic than before. Frank, what is happening? Some people from a cybersecurity firm are here. They're not saying who they are, but they're asking everyone about recent network activity. And HR just sent out a company-wide email about system maintenance and asked everyone to refrain from accessing external systems. Brian is losing it. Mark's phone is glued to his ear. I think they're in trouble. He watched the digital tremors morph into seismic shifts. The cybersecurity firm, having confirmed the vulnerability with their own probing, had officially notified the company of a pending public disclosure if immediate action wasn't taken. The regulatory inquiry had initiated a preliminary review, and the journalist, now armed with the cybersecurity firm's corroboration, was preparing to publish a full exposé. The trap was sprung. Frank hadn't burned the company down. Not yet. He had simply opened the door to the tinderbox, and their own arrogance had provided the spark. As the first official inquiries from the regulatory body began to land in Brian's inbox, the truth began to dawn on them. This wasn't a false positive. It wasn't paranoia. It was a meticulously executed counterplay. They were in trouble. Deep trouble. And the man they had so carelessly fired, the quiet engineer they had labeled a security risk, was the architect of their unfolding nightmare. The silence in Brian's expansive corner office was broken only by the frantic clicking of his keyboard and the strained, guttural sounds of his breathing. The sleek glass walls, once symbols of his success, now felt like a cage. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious to the corporate implosion unfolding within. On his massive monitor, a cascade of urgent emails, flagged red and blinking insistently, painted a grim picture. Regulatory notices, legal inquiries, a growing list of disgruntled clients. And then, the one that chilled him to the bone. A polite yet firm email from the leading cybersecurity firm. Its subject line chillingly simple: urgent. Mandatory remediation and disclosure. He'd tried to ignore it, to delegate it, to spin it. But the spun narratives were unraveling faster than cheap thread. Mark, his slick co-founder, was a ghost, his calls going unanswered. The board, normally so eager for his charismatic pronouncements, was now a silent, menacing presence, their communication reduced to curt, demand-filled memos. And then, a message appeared. Not in his official inbox, but in a secure, encrypted channel he rarely used, a channel Frank himself had set up years ago for off-the-record communications. It was from Frank. Subject: your options. Brian, I trust this message finds you well, or as well as can be expected given the current circumstances. The security flaw I brought to your attention was not a mere inconvenience. It was a gaping wound that you chose to ignore. The consequences are now, as predicted, cascading. I've been informed that the regulatory bodies are initiating formal investigations, and the cybersecurity firm has corroborated my findings. Public disclosure is imminent. You have two paths forward. Choose wisely. Both involve significant consequences. Option A: immediate and complete cooperation. This includes the resignation of yourself and Mark, effective immediately, and full transparency with all investigative bodies and affected parties. The company will retain its operational integrity, albeit under new leadership. The firm will assist in facilitating a controlled resolution. Option B: continued denial and resistance. This will result in a complete collapse of the company. Legal penalties, client exodus, and irreparable reputational damage will ensure your personal and professional ruin. The company will cease to exist. The choice is yours. I will be awaiting your decision. Frank. Brian stared at the screen, his carefully constructed facade of control crumbling. He'd dismissed Frank as a paranoid low-level engineer, a cog in the machine to be discarded when inconvenient. Now, that cog had become the wrench that jammed the entire engine. He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing in the hollow silence. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. He had to call. He fumbled for his phone, his hand trembling as he dialed the encrypted number. It rang once, twice. Then a calm, measured voice answered. Frank speaking. Brian took a shaky breath. Frank? It's Brian. We need to talk. I'm listening, Brian, Frank replied, his tone devoid of emotion, the practiced neutrality of a chess master observing their opponent's inevitable defeat. Look, I didn't understand. We all made a mistake. A big one. The board is breathing down my neck. They're talking about dissolving the company. Brian's voice cracked. We need your help. My help? Frank echoed, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his tone, a hint of weary satisfaction. I offered my help, Brian. You declined. You fired me for being a security risk. That was a misjudgment. A terrible misjudgment, Brian stammered. We're willing to rectify it. We'll reinstate you. Offer you a significant raise, a leadership position, anything. Just help us fix this, please, before everything falls apart. Frank let the silence stretch, allowing Brian to stew in his desperation. He could practically feel the CEO's panic radiating through the phone line. Reinstatement? A leadership position? Frank finally said, his voice cool and steady. Brian, you didn't just miss a security audit. You deliberately ignored a critical vulnerability that could have compromised millions of users' data. You chose to prioritize profit over people, and you scapegoated me for bringing it to your attention. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Option A, as I laid out, is the only viable path to mitigating the damage, not just for the company, but for yourselves. Resignation, full transparency, and my assistance, not as an employee, but as an independent consultant, ensuring the ethical resolution you so desperately need. Brian's voice was barely a whisper. And if we choose option A? If you choose option A, Frank continued, his voice unwavering, the cybersecurity firm will assist in a controlled remediation. The regulatory bodies will be satisfied with your cooperation. And while there will be public scrutiny, it will be manageable. Your careers will be tarnished, but not destroyed. You will step down, and I will ensure that the correct leadership is put in place to rebuild trust. He then outlined the terms of Mark's departure, a complete severance from the company, no future involvement, and a strict non-disclosure agreement that would hold them accountable for any future breaches of confidentiality. And if we don't? Brian asked, his voice a desperate plea. Frank's reply was grim. If you resist, the exposé will detail every instance of your negligence, your attempts to cover it up, and the resulting data breach will be catastrophic. Regulatory fines will be astronomical. Lawsuits will pour in from every direction. The company will cease to exist, and your names will be synonymous with corporate malfeasance. I have meticulously documented every single decision, every dismissed warning, every email. You will be held personally liable. He paused. And I will ensure that the cybersecurity firm publishes a detailed analysis of the vulnerability, including the exact methods used to exploit it, which will render your existing systems utterly worthless. Imagine the headlines, Brian. Company X's entire platform rendered obsolete by its own executives' negligence. The line was silent for a long moment. Brian was not just facing the loss of his company, he was facing the obliteration of his reputation. The choice was stark, brutal, and entirely of his own making. We have to choose. Option A. Brian finally choked out, the words heavy with defeat. What do you want? Frank allowed himself a small, grim smile. First, an immediate confirmation from the board that Mark and you will resign by end of day. Second, a formal engagement letter for the cybersecurity firm, with me listed as the sole advisor for the transition. Third, a significant severance package for myself, not as compensation for my termination, but as a consultancy fee for my expertise in rebuilding trust and ensuring a smooth transition. And finally, Frank's voice grew colder, the finality of his demand resonating. An official, public apology from the company, acknowledging their failure to act on my warnings, and my role in preventing a far greater disaster. The terms were steep, humiliating, but presented as the only viable lifeline. Brian, broken and defeated, agreed. The deal was struck. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, the company's official website announced a leadership restructuring, citing strategic realignments and a renewed commitment to cybersecurity best practices. Brian and Mark's names were conspicuously absent from the press release. The cybersecurity firm, working under Frank's advisement, meticulously patched the vulnerability, implemented robust new security protocols, and guided the company through the regulatory investigations. The public apology was published on the company's homepage, a small but significant admission of their oversight. It didn't name Frank directly, but it acknowledged that critical warnings regarding system vulnerabilities were not acted upon with the urgency they required, leading to a significant period of risk.